Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sarah and I'm the Heritage Diets Curriculum Manager with Oldways Nonprofit. We're a 501c3 nonprofit located in the Boston area, however, we work on the national level. And today, for our Juneteenth conversation, we are inviting Chef Liesha Barnett McKinley, and she'll be talking more about her latest book. She is one of our African Heritage and Health ambassadors. And so, super excited to get her to join. Thanks for your patience. I'm just gonna send her over an invite. And perfect. I see that she's joined. Let me send over a wave. And sure. Hey there. Oh.
Hi,
Hello. Hi. How are you?
I am great. How are you, Sarah?
Doing good, doing good. I was just getting ready to call, but I was like, you know what? Let me make sure that I'm like logged in and everything. But you look, the lighting, the natural sun lighting looks great on you. So perfect
Thank
lighting.
you. I decided to
Yes.
come outside and it's nice today, so get some
It's so
sun.
nice, and especially like the summertime when we actually get weather where we can go outside and enjoy it.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
I'll,
Yes.
also, your volume's good on my end. Am I sounding all right?
Yep, you're sounding perfect.
Perfect. Well, great. Thank you so much, everyone else, for joining us today. Once again, my name is Sarah. I'm the Heritage Guides Curriculum Manager with Oldways. And Chef Liesha is one of our lovely program ambassadors. She's one of our ambassadors for the African Heritage and Health program. And you know what? There's so much to say about you, but I don't want to take it away. Liesha, feel free to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hi, everybody. My name is Chef Liesha and I'm so happy to be here with Sarah today. I am known as the Oakland girl on my social profiles. That's where I'm from, and I love a little Oakland pride. So,
Yes, yes. And are you currently in California right now where you're chatting with us?
I am in
Okay.
California. Yes. I had some stuff to do in Stockton today, so I left Sacramento earlier and now I'm in Stockton and making my way around, running some errands.
Oh my gosh, you stay on the road and busy. Like for anyone who doesn't know Chef Leisha, she is always just active within the community, doing so many different initiatives, which is why I'm super excited to talk about your latest book.
Yes,
Uh,
thank you.
Absolutely. Food Justice and a Practical Guide to Building Impactful Programs. It's really okay. So while I was going through and, just even coming up with these questions, but like reading through it, like there were so many just like highlight this pieces where it was like whether a quote or like advice, like how you include the section of the mantras in the beginning is so
Hmm.
sweet. Like I really enjoyed that. But I'll definitely be guiding us through some questions to, just give us a deep dive of what to expect. But one of the first questions I want to ask you is, what got you to, creating this book? Like, what inspired? What was the inspiration behind this piece?
So it really came out of talking to different people in different settings about food justice and the work that I was doing. And a lot of the questions that would come up is like, how did you get started? How did you do this? And,
Hmm.
and I had all these things written down and I said, you know what? It would be really cool if I wrote something that could be a manual to support people. Because even though there were a lot of books and articles that I read, there still wasn't a step by step how to
Yeah,
for some of the things. It was a lot of the work that I did started out as just ideas in my head. Oh, it would be really great if kids could do this. It would be really great if we could do that, and it was trial and error. So I said it would be cool if people knew like what worked and then not and not what doesn't work. Because I felt like
absolutely.
people's, you can waste time, and time is precious, so we don't want to waste time putting ourselves in positions that are just going to have us spinning our wheels. So, yeah.
Hmm. And of all people to, come out with a project like this where it's really like a workshop on building, food justice programs, I would say you bring so much advice and just like clarity to that subject matter just based on all of your experiences. Like you've worked, if you could just like walk us through like many different initiatives and things that you've been a part of, but like, just from your time with Oldways, you've been at farms, you've been with nonprofit organizations, you've been with library systems. So it's just so many different types of for profit to nonprofit, but really within that community engagement environment. And you've been leading a lot of those initiatives too. So, you've been making a lot of decisions, building it from off the ground. If there were like a connection between, the startups, but, kind of startups within agriculture, like community based, I would say I've always thought of you at the forefront of that. So,
I think really what started out as just something fun to do. People would often ask me to do like cooking classes for kids. And I think that's where it first started many years ago when my daughter
mhm,
was very young. And as a chef, it was like, yeah, sure, I could teach classes. What I found was in different neighborhoods, in different communities with different types of people, a lot of people had the same concerns, even though they had
mm,
varying ethnic backgrounds and whether they were immigrants
mm,
or from here. And the concerns were all the same. They wanted to know how to feed their families, feed them well, and feed them with less stress and, and make their dollars stretch. Um,
yeah.
and I think the where the advocacy and justice work came in was no matter how much I would try to level the playing field, there was still so many barriers to access, and that resulted in me physically getting in my vehicle and driving
Hmm.
around different neighborhoods and areas finding farmers.
Yeah.
And I showed up like I am today on farms, and pulling up on someone's farm, and they're going, "Why are you here?" And I was like, "Are you interested in working with the public? Are you interested in feeding, and what do you need as far as advocacy?" I am a collector of information,
Hmm.
so I started reading books. When I was in school, in college, learning nutrition, one of my courses really focused on it was a social work based class for a humanities requirement, but they talked
Hmm.
about food justice. And I started to read books. And one book was by an author who was a local professor. And I ended up finding her. I sort of stalked her,
Yeah.
and I found her, and we ended up becoming great friends. But she was a real advocate in showing me like this is the research, and I just got busy. Like I just got
Yeah.
active and just started to say, okay, what can I do with what I have? I don't have unlimited resources, but I definitely always felt like it wasn't always about what I actually had, but the ability to connect people together. I'm a talker by nature, so I would just start talking to folks and asking questions. And then, well, maybe you can talk to this one, or maybe you can talk to that one. And from nonprofit industries as well as for profits and schools and others, it pretty much is the same in terms
Mm.
of the barriers, what folks are lacking to get their programming going. I noticed that it didn't matter where you were within this work, that some of the issues were the same. Funding was one of the biggest. And then the
Mhm.
local buy-in. Local buy-in is another, because a lot of people know there is a problem. We have an issue,
Mhm.
but you may not want to solve the issue this way. You may not want to approach the issue that way. So being able to communicate and build relationships with people was a critical point and part of that process.
Yes, and I feel like even in your book, there's a section where you talk about being an accidental activist. So I feel like this absolutely funnels into that discussion of, wanting to build programs and then identifying the issues before even getting to the solution or the creation of that program that you were set out to do. Can you share a moment with us when for instance, like the garden project with your kids shifted from homeschool assignment to into a calling for you? Because I know that you talked about this garden project with the children, and I would just love a little bit more insight on that.
I think it brought me, there was an aha moment that brought me back to my childhood when
Mm-hmm.
I realized that even though, so I grew up with my dad finding little patches to grow things. We didn't always live in a home that had a large yard. Sometimes the area was very small, but he always grew something. And when I started the project with my kids, it was really kind of like, well, let's just grow something. And then it turned into these moments where they were sitting and asking questions. They
Mm-hmm.
were so observant and willing to try new things. And then the garden became a part of our everyday life. It was like, now that things are growing, let's go outside, get a blanket, and do school in the yard, in the garden. Um, and then the conversations about what we were growing, why we were growing it, started to emerge. And then I said, well, if this has brought so much joy to my own children and I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing the efforts, and I said, what if all kids had this? Because I didn't know life without growing something. I grew up
Yeah.
growing something. I was outside, and I thought there are kids who don't experience this. And that was sort of the moment where, what if I started to find opportunities for other children to experience this? And then it became the kids in the homeschool groups coming over and sitting in the garden. And then I'm going there to teach. And, taking what you grew and taking it in the kitchen and turning it into something delicious. It's science, it's math, it's curiosity, it's joy, it's all these things together that unlock these core memories. And to this day, you know, my kids talk about their own pumpkin patch. It's
Yeah.
like the wildest thing ever. Yeah.
No, and I love it too because it's like further into the book, you have a whole section of farm to school activations, many different exercises. Oop, okay, cool. Many different exercises and farm activities with kids. And so I thought that was really cool, like the pollinator's garden and the water cycle investigations. Why do you feel it's so important that we talk about science, justice, and culture in the same lesson plans with children?
Well, there's so many people who are denying the truth of science, and so
Mm-hmm.
I grew up really loving science, being a science kid, being the kid who wanted to be outside and find the bugs and play with the
Yeah.
things. And I really do think it's important that whenever we teach, we try our best to frame it in a way that is real for the student. That's whether the student is a child or an adult. And so, approaching something like the water cycle, the life cycle of a butterfly, understanding the role that ladybugs and all these other insects and bugs have in our food cycle, is it widens the gate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Too many people don't know that, chickens are whole animals that have to be broken down into what we get in the store.
Mm-hmm.
We are too far removed from that. We're desensitized, and not really aware of the way food and the ecosystem supports each other. And I think it's really important that we understand, while we may not want bugs in our home, going outside and killing everything that we see within, range of us, whether it's an ant, a spider, or anything. If it ain't bothering you, leave it. and that was the
Yeah.
approach that I would have in teaching. If it's outside, that's their home. It's supposed to be outside. If it's inside, it's fair game. It has to go. But there are ways to deal with it. There are ways to
Yes.
deal with it that it doesn't necessarily mean the extinction of it. And I think we lean too much on things like chemicals and wanting our yards to look pristine, perfect. And we are damaging our environment by doing that. And if the kids understand that if they see bees, um, if they see someone watering their grass and supposedly watering their grass and they're watering the sidewalk, understanding how wasteful these things are. And it sort of brings this mindfulness effort of maybe, perhaps, if I made these small decisions, that I could have a positive impact on my environment versus one that is taking away from it.
Absolutely. And I love that you bring into the conversation like our disconnection with our food, like even when you were talking about chickens. Like going to the farmer's market, I get my eggs fresh from, the market. And something that was new for me when I started doing that, I was doing it when I was living in Boston. Now I do it living in Texas. Is when chickens are molting, they lay less eggs because their bodies are going through it right now, so
Right.
they can be a little moody. And I was never taught that in school. I didn't know this. I'm a kid who, would go to the rodeo. I didn't know this was a thing. And so it was, it's something so nuanced that, like if you have a chicken or if you're, wrapped in that environment, and it was kind of common knowledge around the farmer's market. Like everyone was like, oh yeah, this season I put my egg order in earlier. I'll put my name on the wait list, to make sure that I have it. And I was like, here I am without eggs, like having to hunt down 5 different places. It really was an egg hunt. Like,
We really don't understand the natural cycle of things, that in the winter they don't lay as much, and because we're used to being able to just run to the store and pick up whatever it is that we need.
yes.
And then the conversation of the reason why we get eggs year round whenever we want them is because we put them in their unnatural
Hmm.
environments, and they don't typically get to live the seasonal life that we
Yes.
get, that the farm raised chickens, So it I think it starts to jog the mind and make you ask questions that you possibly didn't ask before. And even if you feel like there's only so many things that you can do personally to affect change, awareness is important.
Hmm.
Just having the awareness and the understanding is, knowledge is power. So I think that there's this, again, it comes back to mindfulness for me, like knowing,
Hmm.
just understanding the way that nature works is, to me, it's fun, it's exciting. It answers life questions too, that I
Hmm.
think that, if you pay attention to, you know nature outside of humanness, that you start to learn, like, oh, maybe this is, if we're looking at the chickens, maybe we should also slow down in winter, and not look at ourselves as those who have to produce the same level all year round, when all the animals are saying this is quiet time. But
Hmm.
capitalism has us in this matrix where we just keep going and going and going. But the animals in nature is like, no, this is when we go dormant. How come you're not dormant? How come you're not? How come you're not
We've done
resting
our
right
work for the
now?
season. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Humanity still keeps going as if we're not supposed to take breaks.
Yes, and you bring up a really good point because you have a whole section on mental health, mindfulness, and even include these wonderful like garden-based exercises and activities. Those were some of my favorite when I was reading through the book. And I really liked the seed meditation, the soil gratitude, the herbal tea ceremonies. How do you feel like these practices emerge in your own self-healing, and what do they give you for your typical self that your typical self-care list does not?
Well, I think again, I'm a veteran with PTSD, and sometimes, you know, the typical therapy sessions where you're talking it out are great, but there is power in stillness in
Yeah.
so many ways. And when you are sitting still and you're observing the soil, if you are quiet and paying attention, there are millions of things happening right there in front of you. And what for me, it made me understand that if all of these things that were happening that were very difficult to see with the naked eye, and many things you can't see with the naked eye, right? If
Hmm.
that was going on, then whatever I have going on can be okay. Like life can be okay. If this tree in front of me has 2 billion things happening at one time, and it's
Right.
not falling and it's not falling apart, then maybe I can too not fall apart despite having these things. When I was active duty and sitting on the ships, it was staring out at the water. Those silent
Mm.
meditations, they bring something different. You coming out of yourself is a way to, like, whenever you are stressed in dealing with the world, most of it is, what am I going to do, right? Something is happening to me, something is happening to my
Hmm.
family. What do I do about it? When you are in the garden and you're on land and you're near water and you are meditating with the earth, something for me happens where it's transcendent, because again, if this leaf is doing what this leaf is doing and the world around it, it's, there's still a purpose, there's a plan, it's not falling apart, then I can also. And I think slowing down is important, because again, we, for some reason, society believes that it's go hard or go home, and nobody's going home. And if you
Hmm.
go home, you're going home in defeat, right? You're thinking that you've done something wrong. In social justice and food justice work, self-care is important, because we don't get into the work for frivolous reasons, right?
Hmm.
We get into the work because we know that we are making a difference. And that can sometimes play on your mental and make you feel like you can never turn off. You can never shut down. You
Mm.
can never
Yes.
relax. You can
Yeah.
never pull away, because there's always going to be someone who's hungry. There's always going to be someone who needs something. And then you take on that superhuman personality trait, thinking that
Hmm.
you have to be the one to solve it all while you're not taking care of you. And so we have to remember to put our own oxygen mask on first, because we can't help anybody else if we are in a deficit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you speak on just having that awareness for the person who's providing the instruction or the lessons, because that really is necessary when you're offering this type of workout for the community. It can be very physically, exhausting, but also just timely too, because this
Well,
all takes time
yes,
to build and put
yes.
together.
There's a certain level of patience, when you are the one who
Yes.
has to attend the city council meetings, the school board meetings, and you're feeling passionate about the work that you're doing, and you know that you have found a way to do something amazing that will either not cost someone a lot financially or reduce the cost that they're currently spending, but they're just used to doing things the way they're used to doing things and can't conceptualize what you're bringing to them. There can be frustration in that, where
For
you are
sure.
feeling like you're knocking your head against the wall. And it does take a certain level of patience. And that is, a lot of the thoughts behind the book was, there were times that I felt so frustrated, because I'm standing in front of someone and I'm telling them this won't cost you anything except your acceptance of
Hmm.
what I'm bringing to you. And they still have this barrier to to stamping it and saying, okay, let's do it. And the barrier is really in their own mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a real, tangible barrier. It is like a conceptual one. Um, and that can become extremely frustrating, where now you're questioning your sanity, your ability to do this work, and it can lead to a breakdown. And I wanted to make things easy as possible by providing the activations, the meditations, all of these things right there. So you have a starting point so that
Mm-hmm.
there is like, oh yeah, this is great, but I don't write curriculum. I don't do this. Well, here are some resources right here in this book, but also in the addendum with the additional resources, there are tons of other organizations, including Always, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's what
Yeah.
it is. A lot of people they want to start from scratch, and there's this badge of honor in saying you did it yourself. But the real problem with that is, you know, you may or may not be the best person for that particular part, and
Yes.
that particular part has already been done for you. It's tried and true. Schools and organizations are using these resources. They're either free or low cost to access, and you still insist on being the one to rewrite what's written. And yes, you're going to be frustrated if you do that.
Absolutely, because it's going to take up more energy, especially when there's already sources there that you could be, kind of bringing in. And I was going to mention that I really like the section of your book where you're just essentially giving a shout out to all people, organizations, and industries that are already doing the work. Like you had mentioned, Brian Terry, Michael Twitty, Jessica B. Harris. And so it was really cool, Karen Washington, how she's, over the Bugs conference. I actually got to attend one year and it was phenomenal. I loved all the
Yes.
workshops. And so I thought that was really cool because it's not like you really don't allow people to have that excuse of who else is doing this or where else can I find this or oh I'm alone, because you're like here's a whole glossary of different people who have works published that you can participate in and be active and see what they're doing and come together and collaborate. And so I thought that was really helpful, and I've noticed it's interesting. I feel like I'm starting to see it a little bit more now with books that talk about, just bringing together community workshops and coming together. And I think that's what's been missing with a lot of written literature out there is, they're talking about these ideas, these theories, and, they're really connecting the dots, but then it's like you end the book and you're like, okay, what do I do with this information? Like, I want to get more involved in this, but where can I find, a community like this that already has started it. So it's not about reinventing the wheel. So I like how you take that step further and have, a whole section talking about that. I thought that was really nice.
I found that, I started with one name, one book, one idea and thought, and went to Google and started to learn about all of these different people doing these different things, the organizations all over the country, some outside of the US. And it's really a culmination of many, many years of just my curiosity, So not everybody has the same little thing that I have about food that would lead them
Mm-hmm.
down that path.
Sure.
They wouldn't even know what to Google in particular. So as I looked at my own bookmarks on my computer and I said, okay, what books have I read? What articles have I seen? What chefs and farmers and food people are out there doing these various things? And just started to put that list together based on that. Some of them I've had the pleasure of meeting and some of them I have not, but I've watched their work over the years. And I wanted to have a wide variety of different iterations of food justice work. I
Mm-hmm.
think to we get really wrapped up in, okay, well, I could have a CSA program. And that's, oh yeah, community supported agriculture. Wonderful, great. But have you checked to see if there are any others in your area?
Hmm.
You know, because the truth is that a CSA solves one problem of food justice,
Yeah.
and it's a temporary solve. It really solves maybe three, but it's all very insulated, right? The more comprehensive a community is in their offerings, the more they can serve the people. And I think one of the reasons why it is not that easy to find some of this information is also because certain communities are very tight knit and keep close to each other, and they don't share details. Many times folks have worked very hard to amass the following, the funding, all of the local support and everything that they have, that they feel somewhat parental in the sense of wanting to keep that baby very close, and they don't
Hmm.
always share information at a level where you can take that and apply it for yourself in your community. So, and that was one of the things I said was I wasn't going to gatekeep. I felt like the gatekeeping was a part of the frustration of
Hmm.
learning and processing what I wanted to provide for my community, because we're not sharing that with you. Um, and I understand there's a balance, there's a line, right?
For
Because
sure.
folks want to be thought partners with folks and just literally take and not give them anything in return. So there has to be a line. But I really wanted people to take that list and be able to say, maybe, this sparks my interest, I can Google it. This sparks my interest, I can look this up. And then take that and go wherever you, because everybody's not going to be Leah Penniman. Everyone's not going to be Michael Twitty. Everyone's not going
Yes.
to be Jessica V. Harris, the good doctor.
Hmm.
Like, everyone, it's not, everything isn't for everybody, so that was what I thought with that list. Like, let me just give a wide range.
Absolutely. No, and I love that it's just like even how you mentioned Lonnie Powers, like she's phenomenal, like just her herbalism and how she's just so open to sharing her practices. She even has like apprenticeships. And I mean, it's just really cool. Some of the like-minded members that were mentioned where Oldways was like, oh, we know them, or like me, just checking in and being nosy, but just being curious and like not driving and saying, "Oh, I know this person." Like that is cool. So
Yes,
you really feel
absolutely.
like it's like it feels like a large community because the people who are out there are very vocal and want to get the word out there. But then in actuality, you're like, "Oh, it's a lot smaller than I thought."
Once you meet a couple of folks, it's like
Yeah.
you know almost everybody, because it's like, oh, I met them, and they know this one, and they know that one, and you know,
Yes.
it's a beautiful, beautiful thing, because what I have loved seeing as someone who
Perfect. Just wait one moment, everybody. I think we've got a little Wi-Fi thing happening right now. Let me see here. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Chef Liesha just got disconnected, so I'm gonna make sure she's connected back on so we can continue this wonderful conversation. Okay, everyone, thanks so much for your patience. We're just going to get back connected with Chef Laisha. I see your request has been put in. And while we wait for everything to get on and started, I think it's a great time to talk about some fun things that we've got going on. Um, I, we had our conversation yesterday with Chef Jennifer Hill Booker. Today, this is our conversation with Chef Laisha. And tomorrow, you can join us for a webinar with Lady Danny, who's a forager. And so all of these conversations are free for the general public, for you to join. And then we also have our blog post where we're sharing recipes and clips and conversations from our chat with Nicole Taylor, who is the author of Watermelon and Redbirds, a Juneteenth cookbook. So super fun that we are staying connected, doing things. But yeah, feel free to just wait and stay patient with us as we get connected back with Chef Laisha. And as soon as we're connected on, I'll open back up the camera where we'll be together connected. And yeah, we'll be back on it all together, continuing this fun discussion about her latest book. So thank you so much again.
Okay.
Yay! Great, cool.
I
I'm so
heard
glad we're back on.
you. Yes, I heard you, and then everything went away, and I don't know what happened. So I'm back. Sorry.
Perfect, no worries. For people who are just now joining, my name's Sarah, Heritage Diets Curriculum Manager through Oldways, and we've got Chef Liesha here back on to discuss her latest book.
Yes.
So
Thank you for your
great, great.
patience. Yes.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. So what were we talking about before we got off? We were talking about we went from youth and children's programming to mindfulness that's been incorporated in your book to
Hmm.
connections to like-minded organizations and people within,
Yes.
agricultural food services. So we had mentioned several individuals that we knew in connected communities, how it feels like a small world. I would love to get chatting back with, and before that, we were talking about accidental activism and your journey into that. So I would love to go a little bit back to your roots, and then we'll jump around to different conversations because I loved your we'll definitely segue over to your health journey too, because I think there's a lot of really useful, just useful things to hear from that that I enjoyed from your
Okay.
book. Okay, cool. So
Great.
my next question is growing up in Oakland between the players and the pimps and the Black Panther activism, how did that landscape shape the way that you understand food, land, and justice today?
Oh my goodness. It's I saw a little bit of everything. My
Mm-hmm.
dad is a minister as well. And so I grew up very active in community with church and all these other things. And so I got to see all these different sides of the people in my community. Um, they were all human no matter what, it's like, yeah, you got the players, you got the pimps, you have the ministers, you have the store owners, you have the community activists, all in one space. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought, it wasn't until I was an adult that I said that upbringing left me really no choice but to become an activist and work in this, in this way.
Mm-hmm.
Food was the central piece because there was never a meeting without food.
Sure.
In order to get the buy-in for community work, food was part of that. And I saw people giving food away. There were churches and community centers where you could go and pick up food every day of the week.
Nice.
My mom and I would go to these places, and one place she knew had the good bread. The
Mm-hmm.
other place would always have canned goods. Another place would have different things. And so there was a lot of supplemental work with the community right where I grew up at. That really, at a certain point, I saw the decline. And I was
Mm-hmm.
just like, okay, wait, this is this isn't how I grew up, and we are now experiencing numbers that exceed what the food security numbers were in that era, and yet people are hungrier, and so there aren't as many churches giving food away, there aren't as many things happening in the community in the same way. So for me, it was just this whole like, that was a way of life. So getting to a point where I didn't see it happening was a little jarring and confusing. Like, why isn't anybody doing anything about this? Was the thought that
Mm-hmm.
I had, because my mother, she would pick up neighborhood moms and take them to the grocery store, the ones who didn't have a car.
Mm-hmm.
That was just something that she did. She would go get the elderly's groceries, go clean their houses. There was, her and some other women in the community. Everybody had a role to play, and I grew up seeing that my dad was a peacemaker. He'd get
Mm-hmm.
Bloods and Crips to calm down, he'd get ceasefires to happen, he would assist with community members really problem solving.
Mhm.
and this was outside of what they did for a living. This was just life. So it
Yeah.
wasn't even about like they didn't work for an organization. That was just the way life was. So I
Mhm.
think that's where it came from me was just that the way life was activism. The way life was community support. The way life was were these things where I saw activism at work every single day with the
Mhm.
community I lived in.
Yeah, and I really like how you kind of break down those barriers of, what activism looks like versus what we're told it's supposed to look like, because I feel like there definitely is a disconnect there within the nonprofit industrial complex where we are talking about, okay, here's a way that we can do, respectful intervention and see the solutions, especially when it comes to like food justice and, it's evidence based, it's in practice. But when it comes to the reality of that community and systems in place that they already have in the works, you can't just overstep that and expect these solutions or these, the numbers to show up for that. And so I love that how you bring that into perspective of, people had their full-time jobs. This was outside of that, but it felt like an everyday norm. And, now someone would look at it or, people look at it and say, wow, that's activism. But really it was just everyday life. And I think taking away some of those labels to it allows it to be more like inclusive for community members, because I think you've been seeing a lot of, well, like you had mentioned, seeing that disconnect within the community of people not showing up for each other like they have before. But now there's this label on it. Now there's this expectation, now there's this, oh, we need to build a co-op or, build this group, and we need these roles and systems in place in order to even start doing the work. When, I mean, it can be as easy as just, checking in on your neighbor and saying, "Oh, I bumped up there, through." But checking in on your neighbor and saying, "Hey, I'm going to the grocery store too. I'm already heading that
Yes.
way."
And now it feels like everybody is designing a nonprofit organization to support their community activism work, which is not, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that was something that I noticed didn't have to happen in
Mhm.
my upbringing. And in many ways, it does a good thing because we have so many supports that we can get in developing a nonprofit. But at the same time, those those entities are a means to keep people out who would ordinarily support as well. Again, thinking back to me being from Oakland, there are some people who did great community work but would not pass a background check.
Mhm. Yeah,
You know
for
what I'm
sure. Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
Like, there are some people who did great community work who did not go to a city sponsored leadership training, who didn't
Yes.
go to these conferences, who have not participated in these certifications
Specific.
for
Yes.
these different things. And they still were getting the work done. People were still being supported in many, many ways. And I think that a lot of times when we look at the structure of some of these entities, the way they work, somebody might say, I don't fit that, and then
Mhm.
decide not to do anything at all because they don't fit this look. And I'm sort of the queen of not fitting in in these spaces because while I might be a black woman, I'm also will go to work dressed like I'm going somewhere else. Like, I'm going to wear my earrings. Not
Yeah.
every black woman wraps her hair. I'm going to have my jewelry on. And yes, I'm still going to show up on that farm. Yes, I'm still going to be in this space. There are different things that people go, well, that's not quite the look that I had been expecting, And so, again, when I was pulling up at those farms, they were like, why are you here?
Mhm.
But my whole personality, I'm like, that soil is dry over there. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm gonna show you why I'm
Yes,
here. You
yeah.
know,
Oh yeah, for
like
sure.
you're going to question when I show up, but when I start talking, you'll see. Oh, she actually does know a little bit. I don't know everything, but I know a little bit.
I know enough to help what you need.
Right. And
For sure.
I'm also the type of person who is self-aware enough that I'm coming to people I consider the experts in what they do. I'm a
Hmm.
lifelong learner type of individual. I'm never the smartest person in the room. Like that is just how life is. And I don't feel a way about not being the smartest person in the room because I know that I came to you because you are the expert at this and I want us to work together. That is really why the book exists, is because this is what I know. I have some things that you might want to know. Here's the support for that. And, let's keep learning. Let's keep supporting. Let's keep doing this work together because it's
Yeah,
important for
absolutely.
our survival. It's important for our survival. Food justice does not have a look. Food insecurity does not have a look. There's no higher moral hierarchy to food. I think all of those things that affirm culture really has to point to every culture. You can't be in this space and say you only want your culture to be affirmed. And that's the other, thing that I find is really cool when working with kids. They always get excited when you know a little something about how they eat, what they
Hmm.
do, their
For
practices,
sure.
and working in diverse communities and having those conversations and asking the kids, what is this? How do you feel? What is your
Hmm.
parents or your grown-ups, your family, how do they prepare these items when we're walking and talking about what's growing? But it just everybody wants to belong. And I think that's where some of the work has to come in, is understanding that, you know, this is a universal problem. Everybody's hungry right now, and everybody wants to eat well for their health, which
Yes.
is the other thing, too. And the last thing we need to do is, start telling folks don't eat their cultural dish because it's inherently unhealthy for them. If you have some tools and knowledge and understanding about a way to reduce some fat, if that's a concern, reduce some sodium, if that's a concern, we can do that, but we're not going
Hmm.
to reduce your culture in the process. We're not going to strip away who you are.
Absolutely. And it just makes sense how you've been so aligned with Oldways and our heritage diets in particular, because that's what we do with our cooking classes is we're talking about, how heritage is empowering and, still eating the ways that you grew up eating, but saying here are some healthy alternatives or some ways that you can, make it more palatable for your digestive system or, that you're eating from the rainbow and make that feel more inclusive and welcoming and empowering. So we love to talk about that. And that's why, like, even with the work that we're doing, the teacher interest and exit surveys, understanding the eating behaviors, so we could do academic journals with our African heritage or Latin American heritage programs. It's absolutely something that I think is really cool about Oldways as a nonprofit.
It
But
there's
I,
some very rich curriculum that you have, and whenever I'm teaching a class and highlighting an old ways recipe, it's been this whole like, wow, I would have never done that, but that
mhm.
tastes really good.
Yeah.
I think that's been some of the biggest feedback that I have ever gotten. Anytime I refer to always in that way, it's like the affirmation of every culture has been amazing, and then also the understanding that we could do things differently. We don't have to do them the
Yeah,
same all the time. There were some
exactly.
recipes that I was like, oh, I would have never done that, and I
Yes.
love them.
Yes, like our zesty collard greens, like adding the
The
mustard.
zesty, the zesty collard
Yes,
greens is definitely one on the list. The
yes.
the teff loaf. I know that one is
Oh,
a really old
yes.
one,
Hmm. Hmm.
but
Hmm.
oh my goodness. I had never even worked with teff before making a teff loaf. And now I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
let's see what other kind of tough love I can make. Like those
Yeah.
things are just so rich in like, and then when people find out, like who are consuming teff or collard greens in different ways, that this is another
Mhm.
way to do it, they're like, oh, that's interesting.
Isn't
It's so
it?
fun.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really eye-opening too because it's like you could have this family familiar dish that you've grown up eating all your life, something even as simple as candied yams, but old ways and, like-minded African historians who focus on the diasporic studies like Dr. Jessica B. Harris or Tony Tipton Martin, they're gonna, Adrian Miller, Michael Twitty, like they're gonna come in and bring that connection and say, oh, like candied yams, they've never been yams in the United States. They've been sweet potatoes, and that's because West African cooking yams are what is native here, whereas sweet potatoes are native here. We don't have yams
Right.
here. We don't grow them here. So
Right.
that simple dish that you've been making at home, like that connects right back to your roots. And here's jollof and jambalaya, they're cousins. Let's add that to the discussion. And so it's so fun
Yes.
because it really allows us to understand that these food ways, the ways that we've prepared dishes, the way that we consume the ingredients that we are drawn to, have a significant impact not only on our health but on our mindset, and is empowering because it can be connected and researched back to our heritage. And so I really like, like when you were just discussing about those connections to your upbringing and talking about, community organizing, but also talking about like food and how that has always been at the center of the discussion and identifying that. I think that's really cool because it's always there. Like, and there are so many, even like with, going back into Black Panther, just social groups that, social activist groups, there was a huge emphasis on food and eating right for your health and, like having food prepared, or the ladies that would, have sandwich bags ready for those who were going to protest. Like that was a big
Yes.
deal. And it still is because you got to eat at the end of the day. We can't go throughout the day without having some food, and so that's very significant. I like how you were also talking about how there's no true identity or look to meet these, this perspective of this person is a food helper versus this person is a receiver. Because,
Yeah.
if you were at any type of food bank or, soup kitchen, you will really see, like, that's why I really recommend, like, everyone who hasn't done it before to give it a try because, and just see how it is within your community. There's churches that do it, there's food banks that do it, there's nonprofit organizations, but put in a shift. It's free, like just try it out. You have free
Yes.
time,
Yes.
you're feeling down on yourself, you're looking for a sense of purpose, do it, like really, like, and I remember even at my church, together these bags. You put together these bags that you keep in your car. So there's socks there, there's
Oh yeah.
tissue, there's hand sanitizer,
Yeah.
there's little snacks in there. And, maybe I would always throw in a couple of extra dollars or something, but just having that readily available. It's so easy in your car, just like
Yeah.
you see people at those, stop traffic lights all the time. And, even, as a woman myself, you worry about, oh, am I risking myself? Is this dangerous? Like, how can I do this? But just little things like that actually have a significant impact because those around you are also looking and seeing and saying, oh, I could do that, like that is
Yeah.
easier than just looking the other way, like I could actually, offer something that doesn't have to be monetary. It doesn't have to be money.
Right.
Even saying, hey, there's a center down the street, every Tuesday from this time to this time, they offer free, like I just have their handout if you want it. Maybe that's helpful, but that makes all the difference. And at the end of the day, I
Yes.
like, yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say that it really is one of those things where people think that, you know, it has to be difficult. It has to be big and grand. It
It's
has to
so,
be,
yeah,
all these other things. And honestly, there are soup kitchens and food banks everywhere. There are, opportunities everywhere. And then, folks don't realize their coworker could be food insecure.
exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely.
So the mindfulness of, how you talk about food at work, all these different types of things can really, it you can fluctuate with it, so I
For
think it is
sure.
really important to understand that, you have a choice in how you choose to approach it. And again, there are many opportunities that
Hmm.
are there for us to be able to do something. And that is really just, quite honestly, writing that book was really just this. I overthought it for so long. I'll tell you. I
Mm.
started writing a long time ago. That book is a few years in the making, because again, there were people who were like, how do you do this? And I've been a workshop facilitator where I've walked through some steps, but just really in thinking about the perfectionism of it all and wanting it to be a thing. I pitched it to some people and some folks got it, some didn't. And in true Liesha fashion, I said, okay, I'm just going to finish it and see what happens. And that was really, how it got to be what it is. It was like, well, it could be longer. I could put more content in. I could, talk about all these other things. But at the end of the day, I was like, I got to do something. And yes, there's something else in my mind that's working right now that's going to be
Hmm.
an additional part to that. But at least this is available, at least this piece is done. And there was a lot of satisfaction with it because I said, look, either they're going to love it or hate, or and
Yes.
I just had to release myself from the outcome of it,
Yes.
and just say, I think this is a good word for the people. Let me just give it to the people and see what they say. That was it.
Yes, no, and you bring a really good point too, because like at the beginning of your book where you were talking about like trust and going into your nutrition program, going back to your studies and talking about like, our community, the Black community. I love that piece where you're discussing just like a little bit of disconnect or something that was new to you that you weren't expecting, because it brings me back to a similar conversation I had yesterday with Jennifer Hill Booker when she came out with her cookbook. And people were saying, like not like everyone, but it was just like, wow, you've got confidence, like the audacity to like, go out and say, soul food and French cooking and talk about the similarities. And, like people were, I guess it wasn't super common then, and we know it wasn't. But, just even getting that feedback within the community that was just like, I didn't realize that I was, doing something that was uncommon, but I just felt like it was my story and it's something that had to be told. But I loved in your book how you kind of spelled out in the beginning too of when you were announcing like going back to school for nutrition and a little bit of pushback that you received from that. But then you go into how you've been on both sides of that. It's very transparent, but just being on both sides of understanding that mistrust, but also understanding that need for being able to offer and share this information. So also saying, look, when I was in that mistrust stage of, just not knowing what should be and what shouldn't be, you were sharing documentaries and all sorts of stuff, and people ate it up. Like they supported it, they loved it, they were like, give us more. And then when you said, look, I'm going back to, evidence-based science-backed nutrition, it was a whole different story. So can you tell me a little more
Oh
about
my
that?
gosh.
'Cause
That
that
was
was
one of
eye-opening.
that was one of the most unexpected parts of my journey. I will be honest. Now, that was one of the most unexpected parts that really, really left me unsettled for a moment.
Yeah.
And I realized that When I was in school, I took a course on media and health. So
Mm-hmm.
my major is in nutrition, but my minor is in communications.
Mm.
And all of my, and then so also it was like technical communication too. So I studied the media as it relates to nutrition and did a lot of deep dive in some courses that were specific to social media itself. And it was so eye opening, the tactics that have been used in media for generations to convince the public of one way or another, and what they should do with their health, when there was no evidence based, no peer reviewed studies attached to it, no factual anything, where it was just really pushed by lobbyists. So whether that be the beef industry or the pork industry, y'all, people remember pork, it's what's for dinner, the other white meat. It was just,
Mm-hmm.
this whole thing like, hey, y'all, it's cool to eat pork now. It's no longer the fatty stepchild that people are saying stay away from.
Yeah.
Hey, y'all could eat your steak, because steak is good, especially when you pair it with broccoli. And then the broccoli commission is like, yeah, eat the broccoli. And so we see it happen with kale, right?
Yeah.
Everybody is like, kale is the new superfood, and Black people everywhere are going, but what about collards? And the thing about it is negligible amounts of minerals and vitamin difference between kale and collards, but kale got a whole media campaign and collards didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we've got these people who think that collards are inferior, so they're only going to eat kale, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a chef, that curly kale was used as decoration on tables and seafood
Literally,
displays and
yes.
stuff like that. So I'm like, we don't eat this. This is the stuff we throw away at the end of the event because we use it as decoration, but now it
Oh
has a
man.
commercial.
Yes.
But I was very heavy when I started school. And the thing with that was I had several injuries. I had knee surgeries and things like that that had happened after my time in service. Well, one in service and then one later. But I had gained a lot of weight and was having trouble managing pain and all these other things. And, so I had gone vegan. I had done all these other things, and the scale was only moving a little bit. I had taken all of the pills you could think of, the shots, the things before now. I've
Mm-hmm.
done the Slim Fast, the Special K. I did all that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And nobody said anything about any of those disordered eating behaviors and all of the awful things I did to my body in an effort to be smaller. And when I went to school for nutrition, I told my VA counselor that I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to go because I felt like my background in the culinary world would pair well with a new understanding of nutrition. And it
Of
really was
course.
not just for myself. I said, this is for my community. I'm going to teach them what I learned.
Mm-hmm.
And when I announced that I was doing that, there were a handful of folks that were like excited. And then a good group of people who was like, don't let the man change you, and I was like, it was so
Yeah.
now and I understand the reason. So I want to make sure,
Mm-hmm.
because we are live and this is going to be shared, that we get into the reason why. Because
Yes.
there is a reason.
Yeah.
It's 2026, so we need to start to move past it. But the reality is the medical industry in particular has weaponized information when it comes to Black and brown individuals and women in particular, right? So
Mm-hmm.
instead of supporting our health, we have been tested on, we have been mistreated, we have not been given full information. To this day, I have a personal health issue that I'm dealing with that I have been telling my doctors for years to look into, that I only got a diagnosis for in December of 2025, after probably 20 years of saying something isn't right.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
the moment I got the diagnosis and the treatment plan was when I was in the ER bleeding and felt like I was going to die.
Yeah.
So, yes, there is a reason why we are distrustful of the system, but that doesn't mean that the science isn't really clear and that the science isn't there. I am a spiritual person, so I do believe in science and faith working together in order
Mhm.
to again, that's where the mindfulness comes from, that's where the meditation and the prayer comes from, that is from having
Yes.
a faith-based system that you can lean on while you're dealing with adversity. But when the science is in your face, please look. And that was what I was dealing with, that all of a sudden, when I was actively knee deep in my disordered eating behavior, everyone was on board. But then when I was saying the truth, I was met with all of these arguments, and I had to have this very thick skin to be able to move forward with it. Because even though the weight started to come off, I'm still a large body person. I'm still a Black woman. I'm still someone no one wants to listen to.
Mm.
Like I said, when I show up in these spaces, they question first and then go, oh, okay, after they hear me speak. Because there's the bias is there, and it's so
Mhm.
strong and it's so difficult, and it is an uphill battle. But the media has done its wonderful job of understanding there's a science of media where they have studied what colors attract people, what
Yep.
phrases, how you graphic design, and all of these other things, in tone, in color, in presentation. All of these things elicit these different feelings within you, and this is what is used to sell you on products, on
Yep.
ideologies, and on all of these other things. And it really is difficult to someone who isn't trained to see it to wade through all of that messaging in order to find the truth within. And then our micro communities actually believe in these things too. I'm not going to
Mhm.
name any groups, but there are certain people who, within their systems, within their communities, they are actively encouraging and describing disordered eating behaviors to their constituents, their congregations, their people, in an effort to bring them closer to God. And
Mhm.
so there is that argument, right, between the science and between your personal belief system. And so I am someone who supports all people, but I definitely stand on, there are several reasons why a person chooses to eat the way they eat and to live the way they live. Now, if you abstain from certain things for religious purposes, that is perfectly fine and acceptable. It's wonderful. But don't
Mhm.
attempt to make it scientific when it really is religious. Because the science you're describing is not real.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
your
Yeah.
convictions are yours, stand on them. I support it, but the science that you're using to describe it, it does not hold up. Not when you
Exactly.
start to look at chemistry, not when you start to
Mhm.
look at the actual makeup of these things, not when you look at how the body works. There are people who are saying, drinking cold water shocks your body, so you should drink room temperature water, and got a million people barely consuming enough water because the rule of only drinking at room temperature,
Room
my water
temperature.
is going to
Yep.
be ice cold every time, or I'm not drinking it.
Yes,
If
that's a
I can,
preference.
if I can drink
Yes.
soda, eat ice cream, and everything else frozen, I can drink ice cold water. So I think that's where we have to start to say, okay, community, let's get it together. A personal conviction is one thing, but science is something else, totally
Yes.
different.
No, and you bring up a really good point because that could be, I feel like that's what a lot of healthcare systems have issues with in terms of, coming together in intervention. because it's talking about, and that sounds like a really cool class that you took, by the way, media and health. Like
Yes,
that
yes,
sounds really
yes.
specialized and
It
really
was
unique. Like I
really,
would
really
so take a
great.
class like that. That is
Yes.
really cool. But I think that's like we hear it, we've heard it several times where it's just like healthcare partners are like, okay, we want to get more into the community, but how can we, what are some ways that we can do intervention where it is, tasteful and welcomed and, that it can be, we can start to rebuild this level of trust and how you talked about using discernment and challenging that within the community and saying, hey, if it's connected to your faith, that's one thing, but understanding that you can't use that as evidence, scientific base, if there are no actual studies that back up that. And I mean, it can be difficult because there is that certain, especially you with you being a spiritual person and, just in general, having more of a spiritual perspective is certain things that happen that science haven't caught up to yet, where it's like,
Yes.
okay, we are now understanding the positive psychological benefits of sound healing therapy. And once I saw that, I was like, finally, like that is so cool that they're really
And
starting
you
to
think about
understand.
it, and it's like, wait a minute, it's always been there, right?
Hmm.
When you think about like my mom making quiet time in our house, the music
Yeah.
was low, the lights were low, it was a calm environment. This is the quiet time. You do not have to take a nap, but you cannot have a radio on, a TV on. There's not
Hmm.
going to be excessive talking. You're going to sit and read or draw or just be quiet while this ambient music is playing in the background, and to calm your nervous system. It was in children's programming for so long, that
Hmm.
we saw growing up. The shows used to be, there were specific shows that were quiet. Mr.
Yes.
Rogers was quiet.
Oh, yes. His voice is so
you
calm.
know
Yeah.
there was soothing programming, and as opposed to this surgence that we had at a certain point with all of this extra hype programming for young people. And some people are adverse to titles like sound bath or whatever, but it really is just shutting up and sitting down and being quiet. And maybe you don't like the word meditation, but when your granny used to sit on the porch and rock back and forth and just
Yep.
stare at her garden in her yard with no sound, that's a meditation. That is quiet time. That is the ambient noise of the neighborhood and whatever is happening, the resting of eyes. All of those things
Hmm.
are good for us. And you're right, science definitely needs to catch up. And again, peer reviewed studies can lean one way to another, which is why we have people who have been taught how to read and interpret the studies. And so
Hmm.
I can say, look, I read this, and yes, it says this here, but over here it says this. So two things could be right at one time. And I know it's frustrating for a lot of people to accept, but when it comes to this work in particular, there's not going to be a right answer for everyone, everything, all the time. There has to be
Exactly.
for my personal health, I should avoid red meat. I
Hmm.
saw a spike in my cholesterol last year. I love
Yes.
shrimp. I'm not going to stop eating the shrimp. So that means the steak has to go. You see what I'm saying? Like
Right. Right. Yes.
I
Yeah.
love the crab. So that means the steak has to go. You know what I'm
Yep.
saying? Like those are the things, but that is specific to me and my health and what
Yep.
I know for me. And so in the spaces where there's mixed folks and ideologies and people, they get excited and they want to share and they start to talk about things. I think someone said bread turns into yeast in your stomach, and I was like,
Hmm.
well, we have actual enzymes in our stomach that breaks things down, and unless those enzymes have failed in your body, you're not going to grow bread in your stomach.
No.
Because that's
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
way the body works. But again,
Exactly.
we've been conditioned to only hear health advice from people who look a certain way. So there's an uphill battle no matter what. And
Yeah.
I think that when it comes to myself, I had to get really bold. Just be honest. I had to get really bold and get to a point to where it didn't matter anymore what anybody had to say, because I knew I had done my research. I had done, and when people say I did the research, usually that means they Googled something, but I actually have spent
Hmm.
years reading books and peer-reviewed studies and
Yeah,
learning
yeah,
about the properties of these things that we are consuming and seeing the trends and what is happening in media. And, it's just about the love and care of the people, because I said, if I was able to make myself well, because it wasn't about a number on the scale. For me, it was always like, what does my lab work look like? If my lab
mm-hmm.
work looks the way that I want it to look, then I know that some of the things that I have done can be helpful for others. And I just started to look at it like that. So it didn't matter if people were feeling some type of way about the institution of nutrition and all this other stuff. The truth of the matter is that, there are all these beautiful elements that have anecdotal evidence that actually are helpful, but they don't solve and cure and all these other. We got to be very careful with those things, because miracles
Hmm.
do happen, right?
Yeah,
But it wasn't because you drank that one particular juice every day. It was because you did some mind work. You did some very spiritual deep work into believing you were going to be well. You prayed. You got your people on board, and you walked more, and you drank more water, and you ate more
exactly.
vegetables,
Yes.
and it wasn't one thing that did it.
Yes, and that's why they talk about, the effects of the placebo effect, because it's like that
Yeah.
can, thinking it's just that one thing when there's nothing else to back it up, and it's just one instance for one person, it can be tricky, and it's
Yeah.
like you can tell yourself that and maybe you'll actually see some success, but it may actually not have any sort of connection to what you've been doing for the past 5 years,
Because
which I think,
life can be very random at times, right?
yes, yes. And our bodies are actively evolving too. And I think that's something that, can be difficult to convey to the general public because not everyone wants to hear that. It's a very unpopular opinion. And, especially even when it comes to doing things, and this is just within every family, every community, there is this. But, even going into nutrition and food and education, I have some of the same conversations I've had with, my brother, my mother, my cousins, my nieces, my nephews. And what I've learned just from my perspective, within my practice is that I can talk to you about it, but realistically, it's better if I just show you it. And so, I go out of my way to say, you know what, we're hosting Thanksgiving at Mines, or I'll cook the turkey this year. Okay. So let me show you. And then when you've had it, okay, how did you make it? Okay. Well, this is what I did. This is what I did. But, it's just having those light conversations in a way that feels like it's almost new, but it isn't. So,
Yeah.
like, if I have my nephews coming over and we're doing like a movie night or whatnot, yeah, I'll have some skinny pop popcorn that they don't know what skinny pop, it's just good popcorn. Or, and then I'll always have like a fruit platter out that feels like a charcuterie board. So it feels fancy to them, they're like, oh, cool.
Yes.
Like, wow, she's got, nuts, cheeses, and, like, but
Right.
there's
Because
maybe
we
like
are going
one,
to
but
eat our good food, but we're also going
hmm
to have these other things available too. And there
exactly. And
has
all
to
you
be
just,
balance in all
and
things.
exactly. And it's funny because it's paired as like good food or like artisanal, but it's like I went to the farmer's market, got 4 apples for $3, sliced those up, rinsed
Put
off
them
the
on the
blackberries,
table.
right?
Yeah.
Had some leftover walnuts, haven't finished the bag yet. Dropped those on there, threw in some okra in the oven and had it crisp, so it's more like a chip. And, bada bing, bada boom, good to go.
Yeah.
Like it's readily available there. And I think once people see how easy it is to, and it's all about how because we have our resources like setting up your kitchen for the African heritage and Latin
Yes.
heritage.
Yes.
And I really think that is the first step when you think about how do I eat healthier. Take a look at your kitchen, take a look at that pantry,
That is always
go
the first
through it.
thing. Yeah, when I'm talking to people, it's like, you're going to eat what you have in house. So
Yeah.
do yourself a favor and get a few things that are staples that you're comfortable with, and that can counterbalance, can counter the other stuff. Because the truth is that in the house right now there are cookies, there are chips, but there's also grapes and strawberries and lemons and limes and broccoli and okra
Hmm.
and corn and so all of these things, that's what the balance is. And I think people overthink it, and so that is one of the other reasons why, some of the work that I do when I'm doing cooking classes is
Hmm.
really to support folks in knowing everything doesn't have to be a big production. As a chef, there are very few meals that I make that are just really extensive. Like, I'm trying
Hmm.
to get in and get out just like you are. There are times when I'm in the mood to do something cool and that will take multiple steps, but in reality, most of the time it's what can I do in the shortest amount of time that has the biggest payout in flavor, taste, and all these fun things without having to be in there forever. And that's how I end up with some of the things that I make.
Yes, and when you were talking about your health journey, so being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and, the doctor treating it as this rite of passage, how did that experience change the way you think about access and whose health is taken seriously? Because we already discussed, being a Black woman and, having to have this sense of awareness of all these systems in place that make it difficult for us to have access. So can you walk us through like what you did and what you noticed? And then I love how you also talked about high blood pressure and the sisters, treatment or whatnot. So if you could just walk us through your journey with that
So
and
with
yeah.
that, it was devastating for him to just be like, "Oh yeah, yeah." And that's kind of the way he said, "Oh yeah, you're type 2 diabetic." And and he was like, "It's fine. You can." And I was like, "Oh no. Like what?"
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I was in
Yes.
my 30s. I was in my 30s. I was
Oh,
like, "Absolutely
yeah.
not. This is crazy." And then so he was like, "I mean, it's pretty typical. You had to have known." It's kind of the way that he approached it. He was like, "Your weight," and and I was like, well, no, I did not just assume it was going to happen because my
No,
parents
yeah.
have it, and so that was the other thing. What I started to investigate was how the disease works and within your body, and started with a food journal and started to look at how I felt. They give you the testing strips and all of that, and I'm seeing my sugars. And as even though I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, my A1C wasn't incredibly high. It's never been
Hmm.
above 7. But that was still something that I felt uncomfortable with knowing. And I said, well, what can be done? I went on metformin for, it might have been a year.
Hmm.
I did not want to take it, but I told him, I said, I'm going to take this medication. I'm going to do everything I can, but this is going to change. And he kind of was like, yeah, okay. And
Hmm.
I said, oh gosh, he really doesn't think that I'm going to do what is necessary to. And I'll be honest. I do have issues with my knees, and movement was part of, the reason why I started to gain weight. And we were discussing the fact that I was living in intense pain
Hmm.
from my injuries, and how that was the framework for my life. I had to do everything around good and bad days. And it was just this real understanding that I was feeding my children, I was feeding the community, but I wasn't feeding myself. I
Yeah.
wasn't eating very much. And then when I did, I had to compensate because I was hangry. And so I would eat a
Mm.
bunch of stuff because now I feel bad because I'm eating. And so between taking the medication and switching to, I eliminated all beverages outside of water and alcohol. I'm a wine
Mhm.
girly, so I would drink my
Mhm.
wine. But I wasn't drinking the sodas like before. Whenever my time of the month would come and I craved the Pepsi, I would have Pepsi. But I wasn't
Mhm.
drinking fruit juices or any of those things. And then I increased my vegetable portion sizes. I was eating vegetables at breakfast.
Mm.
So because I love like eggs, I would do like omelets with vegetables. I would do hard
Mhm.
boiled eggs, and then I started to carry blueberries, strawberries, pistachios, cashews. I had my snackable foods with me all the time. It was a
Yes.
long process. It was one of those things where I had to think about myself because, again, I would go hours and hours and hours without eating. And of course, someone who is needing to monitor their blood sugar knows that that is the worst thing you could do. Is to starve yourself, and then you end up binging on all of the wrong things. But it was, I think I stopped taking the metformin it was less than a year, maybe just under, and
Mhm.
then it was just this consistency. I started to reduce, well, I switched out my carbs. I didn't stop eating carbs, but I realized that certain carbohydrates I liked in particular ways, and they
Mhm.
weren't working for me and my blood sugar. So pasta was a rare occasion.
Mhm.
um and it was one of the carbs that I didn't like as much as others. I'm a potato girl, and I
Mhm.
like rice, but also rice was something that I had to have a sauce with or something like that, which added to
Mhm.
calories and fat and sugar and things like that. So making the adjustment where I started to eat more starchy vegetables instead of some of those other types of refined carbohydrates. So we're talking about all the squashes in the world. I love them now.
Mhm. Yes.
Love the squashes,
Yay.
the millet, the couscous,
Oh,
the
yeah. Fonio, sorghum,
Fonio,
bulgur, yes.
sorghum, bulgur, lots of those made an appearance as well. And yeah, so things evolved over time. I have been in remission for several years now, so I don't have to take anything for the diabetes, and my blood sugar is
That's
normal.
amazing.
So that's also a thing that people didn't know could happen. So
Yes.
I teach that because when you see your medical professional and they assume that this is your life diagnosis and that you will always need these medications and that you're not going to make the necessary changes, um, that was frustrating for me. I felt like that was so insulting
Mhm.
of my doctor to assume I wouldn't do the work, and I could, maybe that was his experience with his patients, but to assume that I would be like everybody else was just something that I wasn't okay with. Um, so yeah, that was the journey, and and I tell everybody, like, you can go into remission. You don't have to, keep that diagnosis forever. And it's always funny when I do go and see a new medical professional. They ask me about my diabetes, and are you taking anything now? And then they look at my chart and they go, "Oh, good for you!" Like, yeah. They're always surprised. No, I've been in remission for a while, and they're like, "Yes," So that's exciting, and I
Yeah.
hope it brings encouragement to others to know that they could do it too. But it really, it does take work. It takes discipline. And it takes, so you have to care about yourself, and not and that really, you have to care about yourself. People say
Yeah.
it, but you have to care about yourself in action. You can't just say I love myself and continue to do what you know is harmful. Like, you have to make some changes. I know, none of us are perfect, but that one right there was so important to me because of my family history that I had to put in the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you also Like when you were just talking about like changes that you made for yourself in relation to, eating habits and changing up your diet, having a food journal, doing those tests like your blood panel, or, like checking your heart rate, and, like doing what's needed and necessary for ourselves. And even though it sounds, um, to our general public, like, oh, you're going out of your way to understand these things. And it's like, oh no, we should all actually be going out of our way or doing these things for ourselves to understand where we have different nutrient deficiencies. Therefore, we can tackle these problems before they come and become diagnosis. Because it is
Yes.
scary when you hear from, just different professionals, whether it's healthcare, whether it's, fill in the blank, but it comes off like a sense of normalcy. And it's like these are nutrition
Yes.
related diseases that we actually don't need to have. If you look at other countries, other regions, like
And
you
you
will see that those
cannot be
numbers decrease.
afraid to ask clarifying questions to your medical professionals, even if they have, a demeanor that may be off putting. Um,
Hmm.
while you're in there, get your answers and then fire that guy and get another one. Like we
Yeah.
have the ability to choose. And so I
You
think
can
that's
always
what
walk away. Yes.
you can always walk away if their bedside manner isn't what it is. I know we have that complicated history, so we don't feel empowered. We feel like they are the expert. But you've lived in your body your entire life, and you are also an expert on yourself. And if you need to understand something, it is their job to clarify it. It is their job to let you know why you're being prescribed a medication. It is their job to answer the question. When I said, how long, do I need to take this? And he was like, the rest of my life. I was like, no, give me another answer. That does
Yes.
not,
Yes.
that I don't agree with that. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I refuse to believe it. And so I think that that adamant refusal, because I said, I'm in my 30s. I plan to live till I'm 105. This is ashy. So no.
Right. And using that level of discernment too, even when it's someone coming from, a place that you feel is, they have more, expertise on. I love that you talk about, or, kind of advocate for bringing that level of discernment and being able to question those who are, giving you these diagnoses or giving you this information. And I think that's something that just needs to be practiced more. Like just within
Yeah.
the health, nutrition, food space, is having that level of curiosity. And, if you don't know, asking those questions, or, meeting with someone who, maybe you can understand better from. Because like when we go into a, doctor's office, or, when we're speaking with someone from health medical professions, we have the freedom and the flexibility to say, okay, like, it's kind of like picking out a therapist or picking out a chef, like
Yes.
they may have delicious dishes, but they're just not your taste buds of preference, like
Right.
your
Right.
palate doesn't seek those ingredients, or, they're not seeking
Exactly.
the flavor profile, or, that information and the way that feels most palatable
Yes.
for you. And it's okay to say,
And it
hey,
doesn't mean that there's a thing wrong with that person or
yeah.
that there's anything wrong with you. It's just that this
Hmm.
isn't a fit. You want somebody who you can actually feel comfortable with having these conversations.
Yes.
And if there is a reason why you can't feel comfortable having these conversations with your medical professional, then
That's a
you can,
problem.
call your
Hmm.
insurance and say, who else is available? Because I don't want
Yeah.
this person anymore.
Yes.
There's no shame in it. I've done it many times as needed, and when
Yeah.
I get a good one, I give great reviews and let the world know that I got a good one. Because I think that matters too.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We want to say, like, my pack team right now is real solid. Thank you. Shout out to the VA for actually having a decent system for me. Everybody doesn't get a good one, and I got one, so I have no
Right.
complaints. But it is a system, and it's something that, as brave as we are in all these other ways that we show up every single day, for the rest of the world. I want us to show up for us too in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for just sharing about your health journey and ways that you've been able to make that connection between food and access and, how to root for yourself. And I feel like you talk about that a lot in your book. So it's really interesting. I love like the layout because it's like, okay, here's a little bit of, storytelling. Here's a little bit of exercises. Here's a bit of community and organizing. Here's sections where you could take notes and put that into practice. So based upon what you're learning and seeing for yourself, and it really does. It's not saying it's an option. Like, you've got pages there that are like for notes. So you really
I
are
want you
like
to
putting,
write this
yeah,
down. I want you to write this down. And I want you to
yes,
have the
dude.
book with you at work or wherever you're doing this work so that you can
Yes,
go back to the notes. I am a handwritten notes person so
yes.
much. People in this work, we have a million conversations, and folks are like, yes, yes, yes. And they forget
Hmm.
everything. Please
What
don't let them
happened?
not write it
Yes,
down. Write it down. If something
uh,
resonated with you, write it down. You will not remember if you don't write it down.
yes, yes. And so you
Yeah.
really like put the pedal to the metal, like here is this information. What do
But
you think about it? And what can you do
the
with
hope,
it?
the hope with the placement of those pages was that as you got to a certain point in reading, you would feel inspired to look up something, and then maybe
Hmm.
if you look something up, then you would want to write it
You
down.
already have
And
it there. Yep.
yeah, that is what I was thinking. Like, oh, after this chapter of discussing X, Y, and Z, this is something that you want to look up. One of the parts that I put in that I did not really intend in the beginning was the one about conference presenters.
Mm,
That
yes,
element,
yes.
I decided to include that after because I am an avid conference goer. Um,
Sure. Yes.
and I felt like there were a few times where I spent good money to get on an airplane, to take
So
PTO,
expensive.
to
Yeah.
go out of my area to attend in an effort to gain some real knowledge, clarity, and things that I can take and implement back. And it was a pep rally. And while I
Mm,
loved the people, this isn't an indictment on the folks who showed up
for
and
sure.
presented or anything, but it was just one of those things to consider moving forward, that you at least have a takeaway for someone that is not anecdotal, that is not, simply an ideology, something that they can go and some tool or resource that they can
That they
actually
could put it to
implement
practice.
when they
Mhm.
get back to their home and go from there, because there are lots of thoughts and conversations. It's a people overload situation, sensory overdrive, and you get all of these little things. You get business cards, you have conversations, you're following people on social media, and then you get back and you're back into your routine.
Mhm.
And what did you actually learn while you were there that you could take and apply here? Not a mindset, no, a thing, a tool, a tangible, something. Maybe I do have to go download this thing and pay $5 a month for it, but at least I know that is what you use to do this thing over here. And that's what I really need. I think that
Yeah.
was, something that I felt like when I do presentations, you're going to get a PDF of the resources. You are going to get something where I said, this is the steps. This is how I did it. So when I was dealing with the school district, these are the people I spoke to. These are the questions I asked. This is the information I gathered, and this is how I implemented it. So that somebody can go back and say, well, if I try this, it might work because this is not what I did before. So maybe this can work. And then you put your own spin on it, but at least you have a starting point. At least you know some step by steps. It's not just this
Mhm.
get out in your community and talk to people. Like, I could have stayed at home to
Yes.
watch the Zoom for that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's like a real fine balance too when it comes to those like in-person conferences and workshops, because it's like, yes, you need a bit of empowering conversation and upliftment so that people feel inspired and, pulled to do the work. But then we do need to have that also balance of instruction and how to get started into doing the work, and also that transparency of what that work looks like. I have been to a few conferences, and the ones that stood out the most to me is when people are, doing the work, but also talk about the struggle of it, because that's what I want to hear. I want to understand that that is
Exactly.
common. And so, if you're saying, I just want to start a community garden, and oh my gosh, I basically had to stalk the mayor, I had to stalk the local legislature, like I had to come every single week and, show up at different PTA meetings. And yeah, I became known as that woman, but look how fantastic my program is. Like, look at what I got going on
And
now.
that's the thing, the conversation is rarely around the fact that it took for somebody 8 months to get in
Yes.
the door, and that relationship building comes first, and that
Yeah,
consistency comes first. And when you're not from a community and you want to do a community thing for a community that you're not from, people are
even
correct
more.
and right to
Yeah.
give you a side eye because they want to
Hmm.
know your intentions. And so you are going to have to work and prove your intentions. That is what is going to happen, and so you have to be prepared for that, and pack your patience, and and understand that until you enmesh yourself into the community culture, you're going to be viewed as an outsider who's trying to just come in and change everything without understanding the way that things work. And then
Yes.
it also comes down to somebody may have tried to do it before and they failed, and they feel some type of way about the fact that you're coming in and you're able to do it. And everything ain't for everybody, and there's sometimes no real explanation for it. It's a phenomenon that happens. Um and we do our best in terms of not taking things personal, but it has happened to me where oh, you didn't want me to do it but you got somebody else, and that partnership was just not going to work. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not good at what I
Hmm.
do. It is that that was not the right partnership for me or that other individual or entity or anything like that. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, and something else I wanted to speak on about that I really gained from all reading, and this is just a question in general, but earlier in your book, you talk about if social justice were a tree, food justice would be one of its branches.
Hmm.
So, the question I have is, how do you explain that connection to someone who still sees food work as charity instead of justice?
Oh. It's really
Mm-hmm.
difficult when someone frames it that way, but you know if people don't eat, they die. It's
Mm-hmm.
really one of the biggest things that that is whenever I have the opposition, I'm like, everyone deserves to live, correct?
Mm-hmm.
If you're out here living life, you deserve to eat so that you can live. Food sovereignty is the whole nother shebang too, because of the fact that being able to define what that looks like for you is something that folks who have versus the ones who don't have always have a that fight, because
Mm-hmm.
those who have are determining what those who don't should get and how they should receive it. Sovereignty says that I get to decide that for myself, even if you
Mm-hmm.
don't like the way that looks. And so, for people who think that it's charitable work, sometimes you can't convince somebody to be different.
Mm-hmm.
But I get real blunt, because the reality is if I went a couple of days without food, my body would shut down. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a right for everyone to be able to feed themselves. That it really is. It's just a basic right. It should not be a privilege to eat.
Yeah.
Everybody deserves to be able to feed themselves the way that they choose to feed themselves as well. And that can be controversial because some folks are watching people die because of their choices. But again, that's free will.
Mm-hmm.
That is free will. We have to, I think removing yourself from the outcome is the biggest blessing in some of the social justice work because you can't control it. And if you're doing it for the right reason, it shouldn't matter.
Mm.
If your spirit is in the right place when you're doing things for somebody else, it shouldn't matter if they love it, if they hate it, it shouldn't matter if they are if they don't get the message. The fact is that I do the work that I do because everybody deserves to eat, and everybody isn't. They don't have the blessing of having gone to culinary school or gone to a
Mm-hmm.
university to learn nutrition. So that is why the majority of my work has not made me rich. It will never make me rich.
Mm.
Not the actual hands-on work to the community, because they're the very people who need to know what I had the privilege to learn. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the whole point of me continuing my education, was so that whoever needed the information could get it and have access to it. Um, that's why I took copious number of handwritten notes that I still have today,
Yeah.
that I could regurgitate and go back to, in case someone has a question, because, at the very least, I wanted other people to have the resources that I didn't have. Again, growing up where I grew up, food insecurity was the norm.
Mm.
It was the absolute norm. So, not knowing the real science behind how to feed yourself for health, how to take care of yourself, how to use the resources that you do have access to, it's really important,
Yeah.
because I know what folks were getting in those boxes. So,
Exactly. You know what they look like, what the
yeah,
items look like, and how they
yeah,
were being utilized. So it
yeah.
makes a huge difference when you get to see it from that opposite perspective. And I love that you went into talking about like your why, because I think when you're going into this sort of work around, food advocacy, justice, program implementation, it's really nice to have a firm foundation on why you were doing that work. Why are you going out to, be this advocate within the community? Because you can be pulled in so many different directions where if you don't know your why, that can get really dangerous and tricky, because you may be pulled into something that sounded like it had a great mission, or it sounded
Yeah,
like it resonated, or there was some morality and things that were in alignment. But then you actually are doing the work, you see the solution, or you're seeing the outcomes of the work that's being done, and you're saying, okay, this still isn't driving the point that I'm wanting, or this still isn't yielding the results of what I was looking for. Why is that? And sometimes that could be just that connection or affiliation to thinking, this looks good, this sounds good, let's go with it, but not actually having that level of discernment and having that solid foundation of why I want to do it. So I love that when you were talking about just, the reason of why you want to be this person within the community, and just saying this may not lead to all the riches and being this and that, but I'm
yeah,
perfectly fine with that as long as I get to still live out my why. That is fulfilling enough for me. That is my purpose. And
yeah,
that's what you see in a lot of effective communities, and people who are all bringing in resources to make it a active community, is that people are finding their own sense of purpose into doing these things. And I think that when you have these organizations and industries that are exclusive and saying you have one side, you got to fit this certain model, you have to have this certain look, it can be very, it is very exclusive. It's not allowing people who have that actual why foundation and passion for it feel like they can be a part of those conversations. So no, I think that was, and one thing that I wanted to say too that I didn't mention, these things keep popping out. But one thing that I wanted to mention, I'm just like, they just don't want to be in my ear.
They don't.
Um,
They don't.
no. But one thing that I did love is you included a lot of statistics and data analysis within your book. And that is just to say, here are the actual numbers, here's the, evidence-based effectiveness, the facts behind why I believe that this is so crucial to program implementation around food activism and social justice within food insecurity. And so the question I had on that is, based on that data that you've shared, what do you wish program designers and funders would stop doing, and what would you like to see them start doing immediately in response to, what you've shared?
Ooh. I wish they would stop invading the privacy of the people that they are supposed to be helping.
Mm, okay. That is a
Yes.
care to share
Um,
more.
One of the reasons why I included all of that data was because I know that a lot of the work that is being done relies on data for funding sources. And oftentimes the reporting process is quite invasive to the individuals who need it, the support the most. And so what that looks like is when people show up to a food bank to receive food and they're filling out the paperwork, which is a
Mm,
veritable application where they are disclosing personal information beyond their household size and their income, other demographic information and things like that of that nature. That information already exists in social services
mm,
in your at your county. It's already
yeah.
there. You know, I know that they want more detailed info, but I would like for that practice to end because that detailed information does not make or break the programming. And again, the census data should be sufficient. The actual data on who is receiving SNAP benefits should be sufficient. The number of people who are receiving what we call cash aid is there. That
Hmm.
information already
They already have,
exists,
they should already have
right?
access to it. Yeah.
There is that, there is access to it within your local government's website. You can get the data for your area, for your city, for your county, and your region. There is data that already exists, and I think it's very demoralizing to have people come in and have to deal with that. Furthermore, there are churches who require a statement of faith before people can receive support. I want
Mm,
that practice to stop. As a person who is
mm,
spiritual and a church goer, stop it. Either you can
yeah.
give them the food or you can't. But why does this hinge on their membership or professing a faith under duress? They may even
Yeah.
believe and agree with you, but it's the fact that that's part of the process, and you can't just hand those people the food.
You gotta like sign on the dotted line, and it's like,
Yes, you
but
can't hand them the food. You
yeah,
have to proselytize first.
yeah,
As a PK, I keep going, if the people are not accosted in that way, they might show up on Sunday.
yeah,
If you're
absolutely.
just
Yeah.
giving without the requirement of anything else, they actually might show up on Sunday. But if you start preaching to them and telling them what they got to do and who they got to be before you will hand them food, they're not coming.
Yeah, because it feels like a requirement or like another rule or something else that you have to abide from just to have access to something so basic, needed, and necessary. So no, you bring up a really good point, and even talking about when you were talking about just that level of transparency and at requiring the individual to provide so much when it comes in terms to our type of partnerships that we have with people offering the Latin American heritage, African heritage, like our cooking classes, our most successful partnerships are organizations and facilities that are already interconnected. So,
Mm-hmm.
like for instance, a nonprofit that's partnered with a food bank that's also connected with a library system. Those are our most effective programming where we really get to see a lot of cool work get done because it's like, okay, we've got the community garden stepping in to provide ingredients, and they've also invited, volunteers or instructors. We've got the food banks coming in to bring in the participation and, the participants, the people who want to
Yes.
go to these classes. We've got the nonprofit coming in to have, the leaders who are passionate about offering these workshops and giving them the opportunity to become an instructor. And so we've got the universities who want to take that data collection and do it into research. And then they want to talk about academic journals and how to get grant funding to continue offering these interventions. And so it really is having those communications amongst organizations and connecting. Like, I love the work that Tamboree Stevenson, she's one of our advisory board members. She does a lot
Yes.
of making those connections between agricultural to policy work to
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit.
Yes,
And
yes,
so
yes.
it really is, that's where you see, that's just someone, from Oldways. I'm from Oldways. And so we offer the curriculum materials, but we get to hear from different partners and instructors on best practices and seeing who really is doing some incredible work within the community. And that's something that I've noticed has been a common denominator, is it's those organizations that are having conversations with each other and then seeing how they can work together within the community and that intervention. So
Yeah.
you bring up a really good point when you're talking about that. Yeah, so it's just really cool because I know um, you speak a lot on this in the book also. And there was something else that when we were talking about our why and just planning and framework, you had discussed the power of three in
Mm-hmm.
your book. And so three guiding words, three action items, and the way you break that down, it's so simple but like powerful. And I was just wondering if you could walk us through how you use this in your own work as of recent.
Um, Really, that's the number of objectives that I choose when I am developing a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go, okay, what are the three things that I would like for this particular class to walk away with? And then I frame everything around that. What are the three things that I want the people I'm presenting to in a workshop, or if when I am doing a session at a conference or something like that? I found that three things are much easier for people to remember, to hold on to, and to feel like they have when they walk away, that they have something.
Mm-hmm.
It does go back a little bit into my PK bag because um, my dad, and as a church kid, it's not just my dad, but I would say it church kids in general. You'll notice, like, when the speaker gets up and I got 3 points, three key things. Like, that's what they do when they
Yeah.
get up there on the pulpit. And I never really thought about it until I was actually knee deep in development and going, okay, one of my very first curriculum instructors, she taught me, how to put lessons together, and she would allow me to go off on these tangents,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'd have a very janky lesson with like seven different things that were these objectives that were very difficult to achieve, and to be able um, to walk away feeling like all seven things were met within that time frame. And so as I started to pare down and get more concise with my thought process and really just work it, I noticed that three seemed to be a number that really settled well. And it's been tested for me over and over again that if I have no more than three, then I'm in a good space. People
Mm-hmm.
can only retain so much. And also, like, in terms of giving resources, you're going to at least get three strong resources, that you could utilize. And it just became a thing. It stuck.
Hmm. Yeah, and I feel like it's very palatable too because, you bring up a really good point as far as like you're a resource hub, like, like having all this information, wanting to share it, but then being able to meet people where they're at and saying, okay, I don't want to do research overload where, now I'm just speaking at you and you're not able to retain anything just because this is all new information and you were at the beginning of your journey. But how do I break it down into these three guiding themes or angles that we can start to enter this conversation? Therefore, when you're taking those actions into consideration, then we can have a follow-up discussion based on one of the points that you took away that you've put into practice. And so that's a really great method that you've included as far as like planning tools for building programs, because there's a lot of really cool things out there where it's like, even if you see like a gardening and book club, coming together, and you're reading through that description and you're like, it's a lot going on within this space, like it sounds
Yes.
fun, but it's like a little too much.
Overload. Yes.
Yes. And it's like, and I can totally see it from the, like the programmer side where it's like, well, I just want everyone to know, like, what all I want to share and what all we're going to go over. But it's like most people, like, you have them at the first sentence, like you keeping it as like simple as possible. And, then if they have follow-up questions, being able to reach out. Like, I feel like that's very much so in the Oldways way. Like, we have tons of resources on our website and so
Yeah.
many, different studies there that we can point you to, but it's so much more effective when we're able to just simplify it in a way where it's like,
Right,
okay,
right. Because you have to
these three
sit with
easy
this stuff.
steps.
This is not really the type of information that you just continue to collect. You have to
Hmm.
sit with it. And so that is really where I started to understand more of, not to do the information overload part. Again, in deciding how long this book was going to be, I said, well, I could write for a whole nother year and put even more content in and then have all of this other stuff. But what is the average, attention span of the average person who is just wanting a resource that they could use as soon as possible for what they're thinking of. I think this book is really good if you're considering coming into food justice spaces and sort of want some info and understanding about that. It's not so much for the super seasoned folks. It really is like this is, like the beginning of a journey. And that's why I said it's, food justice is part of the social justice tree because,
Hmm.
when you think about social justice, a lot of people only consider certain things, and it's typically based on your own micro communities, right? Whether or not it's police brutality, medical racism, all of these different things. But at the very basic, thing that crosses over all humans is our need to eat to live. And
Hmm.
so being able to put food in there and get people to understand that providing nourishment is a social justice issue is really critical. My TED talk was about what would the community look like if we centered food first, right?
Hmm.
If we prioritized feeding people over other things, what would the landscape look like? And it could look like people are recovering from diseases like hypertension and type 2 diabetes. It could look like folks who are growing food at home, um, learning to grow food so that they are stretching their dollar when they go to the grocery store, but also healing themselves through the power of putting your
Hmm.
hands in soil. That is a psychological thing that happens to you on a cellular level. that actually brings you some calmness, some peace to your life. Um, all of these different things that could happen if food was prioritized. More jobs in food would automatically be a need. We'd be growing more in community gardens, we'd be growing more in
Mm-hmm.
agriculture. We would have more work for the chefs who want to cook the food that's being grown. We would, so all of these things we're addressing employment and health and wellness and all these other things. When we start to look at food, these numbers of other things start to look a little bit, differently. When we say, if people can't afford the food, what if we made the food affordable? Oh, then the stress level of feeding the families is lessened.
Mm-hmm.
So hypertension goes down,
Right.
because we do know that it's not just the food that is making us sick, it is the emotional thing that is happening to us that is manifested
For
in a physical
sure.
form based upon the issues that we are seeing within society. So, to me, food should come first. And I understand, because that's me and what I do, that everybody isn't going to see it the same way. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a very idyllic view. But, we've seen what happens when food is provided.
Absolutely. And it really is the base of every single conversation, because it's like, okay, before an astronaut goes out into space, or, before a doctor is out in the surgeon room, has he had a meal? Like, that makes a huge difference, because I love that, like, with our younger generations, like, we're really just bringing that into regular conversations of, like, hangry, like, like, identifying these things. And I'm just like, yes, like, that is very much so a thing. I love that we actually are putting a label on this, because it has a genuine impact on someone's
But the
effectiveness in their
problem with
work and how
it,
they are with their family.
right, but we only attribute hangriness and emotional regulation and ability to function to adults. We don't look at children and say the reason why they're acting like this is because they're hungry.
And isn't that interesting, though, that we don't, like, allow them that
No,
same.
the kids are just behaving poorly. When you're like, how
Mm-hmm.
about you sit somewhere for 5 hours, told you cannot get up to go use the restroom, have a sip of water, or anything. Do that at work and see how you feel at lunchtime. Do that at work and
Exactly.
see how you feel at lunchtime. If you hadn't had breakfast, or you had an inadequate breakfast, and you're
Yep.
expected to go until 12, 1 o'clock with nothing in your belly,
Mm-hmm.
how would you function? But for some
Especially
reason,
with
the
lecture
children,
based.
I 100%, I said it, and I know it's weird to some people, but I said, lack of nutrition is also part of the school to prison pipeline, because children are being they're acting out their low blood sugars and being
Mm-hmm.
told that they are a problem in the classroom because they are hangry and don't know how to regulate themselves when they haven't had water, when they haven't had a snack, when they're told to sit down and focus and be quiet. You're not even doing that at work as an adult,
Mm-hmm.
but we want the children to do it. And then the kids get labeled as having problematic behavior from a very young age, and then get passed along. And this is now in their their chart, right? In their
Yeah.
records, that they are a problematic student when they're hungry and they're actually malnourished because they're not eating enough fruits and vegetables because their parents can't afford it.
No, absolutely. And it's so sad to hear, like, there was someone who I knew of who they had a sibling who they just assumed was always perpetually disgruntled and, just very, yes. And then they found out later, I guess, when their kid was in college, that, like, no, he just had, like, severe, like, hangry issues. Like, it was all related to food, like him having access to the right things that he actually enjoys and consumes has been an overall evolution for his personality. And I'm like, that is a really hard pill to swallow for me. Like, like, understanding that you're not receiving the full capacity, or, someone's full self because of that. And then how quick we are to, say problem child, or, oh, they're just antisocial, and, bringing that on, adding that to someone's character. when it is actually related to factors that are of our control. And
Right.
so when the, building off that, what I have is if a teacher or a youth leader is currently watching this right now and is feeling under resourced, what is a low cost activity, or just advice or something that you have to share that they could implement this month, or just within their lesson plan to start building food justice literacy?
Oh, that's a good one. Um, I always point to librarians for this.
Hmm.
I love, love, love libraries. It's like my happy place, my indoor happy place.
Yes.
But I would honestly reach out to your local librarian for books about food and farming and
Mhm.
growing. There are lots of cool books that incorporate gardening with different varying characters, and I think it's just a gentle way to introduce those topics that can make it fun. um, their funding is always funding, and time and bandwidth for teachers. I feel for them because they're dealing with so much. The Their hands are often tied. There isn't a lot that they can do that doesn't impact their own pockets.
Mhm.
Um, or their time, and I have been grateful to work with so many teachers who have had the desire and the means to go out and forge that path for them, and to make it happen for their students by having little mini gardens in the classroom, and integrating these things. But most of the teachers don't have the bandwidth to do it at all.
Sure.
They are just focused on getting these kids to pass these tests. And so I recommend talking to a librarian about books and or other types of media that could be used in the classroom. They All the librarians I have worked with through different systems and with other partnerships, like you said, other orgs partnering with
Mhm.
libraries. They they are amazing researchers and will often have something on the top of their head as far as, oh, you know what? I know this book, I know this website, I know this
Mhm.
author that, might be fun for your grade level. But I
Yeah.
do want the teachers to not feel like they're alone and that it's all on them. It's just a really tough time right now for them to be able to do anything other than make sure the kids can read.
Mhm.
Literacy is in the trash. So, there's a lot at stake.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and you bring a good point, but I love the plug for the local librarians because they do so much for the community. People really don't
Yes.
give them a chance to understand that there are heroes. And
Girl,
so
I
it's,
go to the library and ask questions before I go to a shelf. Okay, I'm looking for.
hmm
Yes, help me. And I've been doing that
yes.
since I was a kid because I just love it in there. I'm surrounded by books. What could be better?
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm just going to hand off like two more questions because I know you've been incredibly generous with your time. And for people who are joining at whatever time, this will be always available on our Instagram, but we'll also upload it to our Oldways YouTube page too, so you can watch the full interview. But, oh, excuse me. But one of my questions was for someone who's just realizing I may be an accidental activist also, what is a small step that you hope your book can inspire for them to take action within their own community?
Oh. I would like for them to pick one thing.
Mm.
That's against my rule of three, but just starting out, pick one thing. If it's the school district, if it is the city council, if it's your library, one thing that you could get engaged with in a civic manner in your community. One thing. Join Toastmasters. So when I first moved to Stockton, I joined Toastmasters so I could meet people. I've never had an issue
Mhm.
speaking in public, but it was really so that I could meet people because if you don't get out of your comfort zone, out of your circle, then you're not going to find the people in the community who are engaged in other things. So Toastmasters itself, I ended up meeting a couple of police officers, a couple of nonprofit organizers, the president of the one of the Chamber of
Wow.
Commerce's, some teachers, like everybody was there in all the backgrounds, a couple of retired folks. So find one thing, like if you volunteer at the library, go to the city council meetings or go to the school board meetings and just start to engage with one entity to learn more about your community.
That's really solid advice. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And my last question is, what is your dream for how this book is used in churches, schools, community gardens, policy tables? Paint us a picture of what an ordinary Tuesday looks like in the future for someone who is engaging with your book.
Oh, that's an excellent question, Sarah. Oh my goodness. Um, let's see. I want someone to have it with them while they're at work. And
Mm-hmm.
if something, while they're in community, like in their backpack and their, briefcase, it is built for travel, um,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I printed it the size that I did as well, so that you can write in it, write your notes.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm hoping that there's a space where they can find these moments in their own communities and go, wait a minute, and then open and flip to a page and go, that's what she was talking about, and
Mm.
be able to see themselves in it. And however they
Yeah.
choose to engage is how they choose to engage. But I want that to be like, it would be incredibly satisfying to know that, you know, they're seeing something and then they are able to look in the book and go, either that's an opening for me to come in and support, or this is something that is going really well in the way that is described in this book. And that's one example of what food justice in work looks like.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. And no, I actually thought about that too, about the size and like the durability, as I was like, ooh, I could just like get this and throw it in my bag and keep it going, like, because I'm someone who loves to keep around like a notebook or a journal or whenever I just need to, I see something and I want to hold on to it, I'll write it down. So, I guess my last follow-up question is, I always want to give people an opportunity. What's next? Like what's going on with Chef Liesha? Like
Oh.
what are some things you want to fill us in on?
So, what is next? I have been writing submissions for various publications. So, you might be seeing my written words somewhere else very soon. Fingers crossed. These
Yeah.
are the editors are looking at them right now, and hopefully, there are not too many red marks when I get them back.
Yes.
But I also have decided to start to really conceptualize the next level of the next iteration of a book that will combine more recipes with
Mm-hmm.
the food justice content.
Yeah.
So several years ago, I think it was like right at the beginning of the pandemic, I did an e-cookbook. Um, and I didn't push it too hard because I was so nervous. The folks are, I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my stuff. So I wanted
Yes.
to, I wanted to make, it's all perfect, but I really, really am revising that book and adding much more to it
Mm-hmm.
as a love to my I love African diasporic foods. And so in
Mm-hmm.
the first iteration, there wasn't enough of the variety of foods that I actually do enjoy eating and cooking for
Mm-hmm.
myself. So I'm in current recipe development for that. Um, and so just lots more classes. The summertime, it'll be a little bit of a up and down as far as what's available. But this fall is going to be some fun stuff. But really, really, just looking forward to some of these publications coming out and a revamp of my Substack. I'm going to I've written a lot. A lot
Hmm.
of my Substack is very conversational in tone, which I don't mind. But I am a good technical writer, and I'm going to be mixing in more videos as well as some
Ooh,
technically written
yeah.
pieces with some of the many, many sources that I have saved on my computer because it's ridiculous. And in an effort to really just start to interrogate, the food justice world in a sense, like I want to spark some thoughts. I want to spark some conversations, and I'm all about using studies and real data in order to do that. So,
Yes.
so I'm going to bring in more of that to some of the conversations moving forward.
Great. And where can we find you? Like, what's the name of your Substack, your YouTube, your Instagram, your website?
I
Like,
am literally the Oakland girl everywhere.
love that. That is so hard to do. Like, I'm
Yes.
giving you a round of applause because that is
The
like,
moment that I realized I could do it, I was like, yep. Yeah. So the Substack is the Oakland girl, the TikTok is the Oakland girl, the Facebook is the only one that I think is Chef Liesha, just because that's the oldest and it's been there the
hmm,
longest. But
always,
everything is
yeah.
connected. Yeah, everything is connected. But yeah, I'm the Oakland girl everywhere. I
Love
tried to make
that.
it. I tried to make it easy as possible for
Even
everyone.
though,
Like,
yes, yeah,
you're
across
gonna
the board
find
where you just,
me. You're gonna find me. And thankfully, I've done enough digital work that my footprint is kind of cool. So if you just type in my
yes.
name, you can find some stuff too there that, yeah, so I'm happy about that.
No, it's been really like phenomenal and easy to like just keeping up with you because of that work that you put into making your footprint readily available and like
Many, many
accessible.
years.
And
Many,
I know that
many
takes
years.
work.
Yes, yeah.
So that is really cool. And, also like, you're doing this yourself. Like it's not even like an
Yes.
organization that you're like, you are doing all this yourself.
Yeah,
So I'm like,
yes, yes. So
even
please
more
be easy
impressive.
with me whenever you see any of the designs of anything, because I did it myself. I taught my I taught myself how to do all of that. So
Yeah, self-taught. Like, I'm like, everyone, the younger folks are like the Renaissance woman who's like doing everything.
yeah. One day
So,
I won't have to, but that's just the way it is
yes,
now.
exactly. But no, appreciate it. And I appreciate your time. And this was so fun. We gotta have more conversations like
Yes,
this for
I
sure.
know. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Sarah. I appreciate you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone who was able to join, and I will be plugging in more insight on where to find out and learn more about the Oakland Girl, Chef Liesha, and talking about our Juneteenth celebration. So this was a lot of
Yes,
fun, and for purchasing the book, I saw that it's available on Amazon.
yes.
And yes, okay, so that's like the easiest place for sure that we can like get it.
Right. That's the
Okay,
easiest way to get
perfect.
it. Hmm.
Perfect. Yes. And it's also it's in your link on your
It's in my
IG
bio.
too. Yeah,
Yes,
link in
it's in
bio.
the, yeah, it's there. It'll take you right there.
Perfect. Yes.
Thank you so much,
Alrighty then.
Sarah. Thank you,
Yes.
everybody, for tuning in.
Absolutely. Have a good rest of your week and happy Juneteenth.
All right. Happy Juneteenth. Bye.
All right. Bye.